A tense budget hearing erupted after Congressman Greg Casar confronted Education Secretary Linda McMahon over a proposed billion-dollar Trump Ballroom project, asking how many school lunches and teachers that same money could fund instead.
I thank the gentleman. I now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Casar.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to enter into the record a report from the Democratic staff of the Senate Help Committee, which found that the Office of Civil Rights reached a 12-year low last year in protecting students from discrimination. It's titled, "Justice Denied: How Trump's Office of Civil Rights Reached a 12-Year Low in Protecting Students from Discrimination, Reaching Zero Resolution Agreements in 2025.
Without objection, so ordered.
Good morning, Secretary McMahon. We're here to talk about the budget for the Department of Education, so I'd like to ask you a couple of questions about school funding and funding in our schools. Can you tell me how much more or less it costs to give a child free lunch at a public school?
Well, the Department of Education does not control, that's not part of our budget.
I know, but when the USDA does that funding, it's about $4.60 for a school lunch. Do you know about how much the average school teacher makes at a public school per year?
That varies across different states. It can be anywhere from 40-some thousand to 90-some thousand.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. It's about $64,000 on average nationwide. So here's an easy one because it's all over the news. Can you tell us how much Congress is being asked to vote on next week for President Trump's ballroom?
I don't know that answer.
It's $1 billion. And you're a businesswoman, so I'm hoping you can help me do some math here. $4.60 for a school lunch, $1 billion for a ballroom. Can you tell me about how many free school lunches that $1 billion could pay for?
It is my understanding on the ballroom, excuse me, and I've heard the president say this, the taxpayer dollars will not be used to build the ballroom, but they are donations from private enterprise.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'll have entered into the record some Republicans, this article from NBC yesterday, some Republicans aren't sold on $1 billion price tag for Trump's ballroom project in party line GOP bill.
Without objection.
We are voting on $1 billion in taxpayer dollars in addition to those private donations. And so for those $1 billion in taxpayer dollars, at $4.60 a lunch, that is 217,391,304 lunches. That's lunch for more than 1 million kids, 1 million Americans for the entire school year. But let's say that we're not going to talk about lunches because that's USDA. We can talk about teachers. At $64,000 a year, do we know how many new teachers we could hire if we sent $1 billion out to the states for reducing class sizes and hiring more teachers?
I'm sure you have that number.
Yes, it is 15,000 more teachers. Or we could pay for the Office of Civil Rights that's being cut in this budget 7 times over. I think you get the point. So here's my real question here. As Secretary of Education, which do you think helps our nation more? Getting free lunch to more than 1 million more kids, 15,000 more teachers, or the ballroom?
I think those are incredibly weird comparisons. I do believe that our teachers should be paid well for what they do. I think teachers are underpaid. I think teachers should also be paid for performance. And I would like to see us have our teachers be compensated. I'd like to also see that there would be teachers who were paid more than administrators in schools. We have more administrators, and they're paid higher salaries than our teachers are. And I think state budgets, all of that, should take all of that into consideration when they're hiring their teachers, because it is state budgets.
Then I do think it is weird that next week, like you said, it's a weird question, because it's weird that next week we're being asked to vote for $1 billion for a ballroom, while there are cuts to the Department of Education and cuts to education. In my own community in Austin, Texas, they are about to cut 200 positions at Austin ISD, close 10 schools. This budget makes it worse by cutting the equivalent of about 400 teachers' salaries in my district. So I'm asking for you, as being a member of Donald Trump's cabinet, to tell us, do you support $1 billion for the ballroom when we could use that $1 billion to raise teacher salaries, as you've said, or use that $1 billion to hire 15,000 more teachers? How can you defend the ballroom, or do you defend the ballroom, if we could use that $1 billion for the needs of our kids in our schools?
Congressman, those budgets that you're alluding to are state budgets. They're not federal budgets.
But we send money to the states and their school districts, and they hire teachers, right?
Teacher salaries come out of state budgets. They don't come out of federal budgets.
When we send federal money to schools, and then they hire teachers. When you send Title I money to schools, they get grants from the federal government, they hire staff. They hire teachers. They're getting a cut here. We could send $1 billion more, but it sounds like you don't want to defend Donald Trump's ballroom here.
I think the ballroom has many different opportunities, and the president's alluded to them. I think we saw one just recently when there was an attempted assassination on the president's life in a ballroom that was not secure.
Right, and of course that was horrific and unacceptable. The question before us is, if we were to vote on an extra $1 billion, do you think it should go to our kids and education or to this East Ballroom project?
I think we need to look at the budget overall in its entirety.
And I think the gentleman's
I yield
time
back.
has expired. And yields.
The hearing became a fiery clash over government priorities as Congressman Greg Casar challenged Education Secretary Linda McMahon over federal spending tied to a proposed $1 billion ballroom project associated with President Donald Trump. Casar framed the issue as a direct comparison between luxury government spending and the financial struggles facing public education systems across America. By repeatedly bringing the discussion back to school lunches, teacher shortages, and classroom cuts, he attempted to make the debate personal and tangible for everyday Americans watching the hearing. Casar's strategy centered around simple but politically powerful math. He pointed out that a single free school lunch costs roughly $4.60 and argued that $1 billion could fund over 217 million lunches, enough to feed more than 1 million students for an entire school year. He then shifted to teacher salaries, arguing that the same amount of money could fund roughly 15,000 teaching positions nationwide. The exchange highlighted a broader political narrative Democrats have increasingly emphasized, whether federal spending priorities are disconnected from the economic realities facing schools, families, and local communities. Secretary McMahon pushed back carefully throughout the hearing, repeatedly arguing that many of the education funding decisions Casar referenced happen primarily at the state level rather than through direct federal control. She also described the comparisons as weird, suggesting the Ballroom project and education budgets were being conflated unfairly. At the same time, McMahon acknowledged that teachers are often underpaid and even argued that educators should potentially earn more than school administrators. That moment created an interesting contrast in the hearing. Both sides agreed teachers deserved better pay, but sharply disagreed on whether federal spending choices reflected that priority. The tension escalated further when Casar brought the issue closer to home by referencing school cuts in Austin, Texas. He warned that local schools were facing staff reductions and closures while Congress was simultaneously discussing massive expenditures elsewhere. By tying national spending debates directly to local consequences, Casar attempted to frame the hearing not as an abstract budget fight, but as a real-world issue affecting classrooms, teachers, and children. McMahon, however, avoided directly saying whether she personally supported prioritizing the Ballroom project over education funding, instead repeatedly returning to broader budget considerations and state responsibility. In the end, the hearing reflected a much larger debate happening across the country about federal spending priorities and the role government should play in supporting public education. Supporters of Casar will likely view the exchange as a sharp critique of misplaced spending during a time when many schools are struggling financially. Supporters of the administration, meanwhile, may argue that the comparison oversimplified how federal and state budgets actually work. But politically, the hearing succeeded in creating a powerful visual contrast, billion-dollar projects on one side, and school lunches and teacher salaries on the other. A debate likely to resonate far beyond the hearing room itself.